Welcome back to the show. Joining me this week is Lyudmyla Kozlovska. She is a human rights defender, the president of the Open Dialogue Foundation, and a Bitcoin advocate. Lyudmyla, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to hear your story.
Hello, Natalie. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you everyone for being with us.
I really want to start at the beginning. I know that you're from Ukraine, but specifically the Russia-occupied Crimea region. Tell me a little bit about your background and upbringing.
So I'm Ukrainian activist, and I moved at some point to Poland to establish Open Dialogue Foundation as a human rights organization. We are a non-profit, international, non-partisan organization with over 15 years experience. And our main area of experience lies in our ability to engage with policymakers and promote pro-liberty policy reforms and legislations. So we actually defend political prisoners and everyone who are politically persecuted. And from other side, we defend specifically the focus for the recent years, for the last 3 years, on financial freedoms and financial exclusion, and how Bitcoin actually help us to be the bank of last resort for those who are financially excluded in many authoritarian countries.
But so why did you become so passionate about this? Why did you end up moving to Poland? And I know that something very serious happened there, right? You were deemed a threat to national security. So tell me that whole journey.
So as a Ukrainian student who was very active during the Orange Revolution, I know personally how it's so important to have access to democratic governments and politicians who can help and who are the only resort to help those who are politically persecuted. So this is the reason why I came to Poland, and I had a privilege to work with many parliamentarians. I was invited by Polish government at that time as the only Crimean student to do PhD work. And for me, it was always a dream to establish foundation and defend human rights activists, just the same as background as I used to have during Orange Revolution, when all of us were persecuted, and we didn't know if tomorrow is going to be for us or not, or all of us can be beaten, tortured, or disappeared because of our will to be and live in free country and have free speech. So when I came to Poland, it was a country actually of a lot of opportunities. So this is the reason why I established foundation there. But back in 2017, the Law and Justice Party took over the government, and they started to violate constitution, rule of law, and independent judges, prosecutors, human rights activists, women rights activists, LGBT rights activists, basically everyone, entrepreneurs, all of us, we became the victim of political harassment, smear campaign, and also a lot of people were arbitrarily detained with no decision of the court. Law was implemented just a political tool, as a weapon against those who wanted to defend constitution and rule of law in Poland. And I was, as a Ukrainian, quite famous at that time because of my human rights activity internationally. Became an easy target for the government. So they decided to threat basically all human rights activists, announcing me without no legal ground as a threat to national security, money laundering, spy, Russian spy for Brussels, spy for Germany, for MI6, every kind of possible, false propaganda. And all state institutions were used against me, including tax custom controls, attempt to basically withdraw registration of our organization. At some point, I was deported from EU to Ukraine, actually again without no legal ground. But because I was active as in my foundation in defense of political prisoners for, at that time, over a decade, I had, of course, also support. I know how to defend people in this situation. So we immediately started to expose all of this human rights violation. And I got support of President Macron, Prime Minister of Belgium, President of Germany, Parliament of Germany. While about threat to national security in Poland, there was national interest in Germany. And this is how I was able to raise voices, all those people who were not getting access at all to public opinion, but were politically persecuted. I was speaking in parliaments of Bundestag, France, Belgium, UK, many other institutions. The only purpose was to defend those who are politically persecuted. And this moment, when the government of law and justice, they understood they cannot do anything with me, with my organization, they decided to financially deprive me the rights. So they sent different kind of mutual legal assistance requests, basically country-to-country requests, in cooperation with other not democratic countries, authoritarian regimes. At that time, it was Moldova, who has the same problem with me and our organization because we defended political prisoners in this country, and Kazakhstan. So 3 states in 2018, since 2018, till basically October last year, they were all the time abused my banking data. They were weaponizing my banking data, my organization, our volunteers, our lawyers. My friend and my lawyer foundation, Lyudmyla, she was nearly kidnapped because of weaponization of the banking data. Her brother was severely tortured and sentenced for many years, again on political purposes, as a hostage. So this is just a few examples. And all of our donors, all of our recipients, all of this data was used for harassment, for smear campaigns in more than 20 languages. And this is the reason why we have lost our bank account. And even with political support, as I said, I had quite significant political support and protection. I granted residence permit in Belgium, and also I had protection there, the same my colleague here. But authoritarian regimes were able to abuse banking data because of abuse of financial action task forces recommendations. And this is a moment when we started to do campaign against this kind of transnational repression. We call it transnational financial repressions. And we started to use as a defense tool, as the only financial tool, payment instrument, fundraising instrument, Bitcoin. And this is the reason we say Bitcoin is a human rights. And you use it human rights not only in authoritarian states, peer-to-peer transactions specifically, but also unfortunately, you have to use it in democracies because authoritarian regimes are able to weaponize banking data of democratic countries. And this is where we're right now.
Wow. I mean, a lot of my viewers and listeners are familiar with what happened in Canada with the trucker protests and some bank accounts being seized or frozen by the government. But this seems just on a whole nother level. I mean, so much more intense and aggressive, the actions against people like you. Coin Stories is brought to you by Bitdeer, where the power of Bitcoin mining is at your fingertips. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer's global reach and scale means they're everywhere you need them to be, ensuring you're part of the thriving Bitcoin economy. Bitdeer's not just mining, they are industry pioneers, and Bitdeer stands alone as the only vertically integrated, technology-focused Bitcoin mining company. What does that mean? Well, they're not just deploying, but developing the latest tech to make Bitcoin mining more efficient and effective. With the industry's most experienced leadership team, innovation is in their DNA, and it shows, with a quarter of their workforce dedicated to research and development, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in Bitcoin mining. And now they're leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a recently announced partnership with NVIDIA. Join Bitdeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today. If I have this correct, so it sounds like when you were going to Poland, essentially there was a political shift that happened in 2017. A different party came into power, and you were helping defend people like prosecutors and judges who were essentially speaking out against the government, saying that they were in opposition of the Constitution and violating human rights. And because you were defending those people that were essentially dissidents of the government, they targeted you and eventually even went after your bank accounts, your financial freedom. And so are you essentially a political refugee, or do you have political asylum in Belgium? That's where you are right now?
This is interesting situation because it's not my native. I'm Ukrainian, so my country is not persecuting me. And it's my second, I would say, motherland, the country where I established as a foundation, where I used to live for over a decade. This is a country where I grew up professionally. This country became to attack me together with other authoritarian regime where I defended political prisoners. So this is kind of unique situation. And for example, when we met last week with financial action task forces or senators of US government, or previously I met with many other European politicians, policymakers, all of them, they cannot even process this. It's unbelievable how it's possible that 3 regimes abused every single financial action task force's recommendations and weaponized, media smear campaign. They weaponized banking data. They were able to attack donors, recipients, network of activists. This is what and where we right now. So imagine you have bank account, right? Like everyone who is looking at us most probably have bank account. In democratic countries at least. So imagine you're absolutely transparent. Right. Everyone from authoritarian regime can get access to your data, abusing banking data. And this is so scary. This is so important. We have to make this loud as much as possible, so we protect our democracies and our financial freedoms.
Well, just recently, before I believe it was a congressional hearing, Secretary Janet Yellen basically could not say that Americans' financial transactions were not surveilled for certain words to know, were they a part of this political party? And essentially the banks are just watching all of Americans' transactions, is what it sounds like, which you would think violates our constitutional rights. And you were just in DC, right? I mean, because you're really fighting for this freedom technology to be allowed to spread in terms of adoption in Europe, but there are a lot of obstacles. So what were you doing in DC exactly?
So we were defending, first of all, we were presenting our submission to US regulators, both senators, but also State Department and also Financial Action Task Forces, which shapes with, let's say, global financial reality. Because from one side, when we meet with senators' offices and, for example, with US State Department, they always say that, it's only domestic regulation, but it's never like this. Whatever is happening in US, it's actually affect global financial system. You establish, you want it or you don't want global standard, golden standards of financial regulation, and then it's basically step by step repeated in every jurisdictions. And our key role was to defend peer-to-peer transactions of Bitcoin, self-hosted wallets, and mixers as privacy instruments. We explained to regulators that we cannot, even if we want to use crypto asset services providers, for example, exchanges or banking financial systems, we exclude it. It's not allowed at all in authoritarian, non-democratic states. In most of the countries in our world, it's authoritarian. It means that entire population of the globe financially excluded. If only you raise your voice against dictators, you immediately punished and you financially excluded. And the only instruments what you can use, it's actually peer-to-peer transactions, Bitcoin, and self-hosted wallets and mixers you have to use also to protect your data, also your donors and your recipients. And when I was asked, how it's possible that you say that you use only Bitcoin, why you use also mixers, and why you use specifically self-hosted wallets, we explained in one very dramatic case we had in, for example, in Uzbekistan back in July 2022, when a group of human rights defenders and activist volunteers, they were fundraising. They had the only access to financial regulated institutions, it's exchanges, crypto exchanges. So they did fundraising through these exchanges. And unfortunately, on the third day of the peaceful protest in Kazakhstan, these exchanges share the data with authorities of Uzbekistan, which is one of the most actually dictatorials in the world. And all these people disappeared, were sentenced for many years, were tortured. And this was one of the most painful experience why we don't have other tools. And these people, they were not able to fundraise through traditional platforms like GoFundMe, Patronate. They were excluded by default from banking system. So for them at that time, exchanges was the last resort, but it never worked. So this is the reason why we defend peer-to-peer transactions and self-hosted wallets and mixers.
Well, let me ask you, Lyudmyla, there seems to be a pushback against things like coin mixers because government officials are saying that they're used for money laundering and illicit activities. So what is that position of defense that you go out there and you simply say, this is why we need to be able to have these privacy tools?
So first of all, as I mentioned, we don't have other tools and we have to have rights to actually protect our financial freedom. It's not something what we just wish. It's our necessity. It's our human rights. We need to have right for privacy and we defend it, especially in the countries where no other financial and payment fundraising tools for entire human rights defenders, opposition leaders, journalists, and activists. And normally all democratic countries, they support it. They want us to support us. They ask us how we can reform banking system. And I have no answer for it. Because how you can protect a banking system from being abused if it's just a continuation of weapon? It's an arm in the hands of dictators, and they use it exactly against everyone who is opposing the government. So you need to have independent payment instrument, fundraising instruments, which allows you to protect, for example, from abuses like in Kazakhstan, where transactions of activists can be blocked 3 to 5 minutes. Kazakhstan is able to identify in Stripe network specific transactions of activists who are fundraising for families of political prisoners and block it in 5 minutes. Imagine the speed and capacity, what they do. What we advise Financial Action Task Force and State Department and senators of US actually to consider not to disclose instruments of intelligence of democracies, not to empower all of the dictatorial countries to abuse financial instruments and surveillance instruments against civil society. They should not treat financial institutions of authoritarian states and financial institutions of democracies equally. This is what we right now see in travel rule of Financial Action Task Force. And this is what we also advocate to change. Otherwise, we will be always in a weak position and all of our data will be abused by dictators.
It's crazy to think about, I mean, the fact that when you put your money in a bank, whether you're here in the United States or a country elsewhere, that's really not your money. And if the government says that you're doing something wrong, it seems like they could just make a phone call and notify that institution, which has such a tight relationship with them and they're so closely regulated, that they say that person's account, make sure that they cannot access it. And that essentially happened to you. And if you can't access your money, then, I mean, you're prevented from moving anywhere, protecting yourself, right? I mean, this gets really serious in some cases. And you mentioned your friend who I would love to have her on the show soon, Bota. She was almost kidnapped.
Yes, it's terrifying. It's literally terrifying. But imagine one day you wake up. All of us, we use like less and less cash, right? So you wake up one morning and you just find out that, okay, you don't have you actually have only €5 and your bank account terminated. You have no access. And this is what you can face if you don't actually, protect your financial freedom. But I want to say one more thing. While, for example, authoritarian regimes able in democratic countries, this is what I'm underlining. I live in the heart of EU in Brussels, like just 15 minutes from European Parliament, European Commission. If this authoritarian regime able to weaponize my banking data in the heart of Europe, and at the same time, they abuse sanctions regime. They support Russia and all basically other dictatorial countries who are under sanctions and able to get all sanctions good. How it's possible? How our financial system is actually broken, exposed for these abuses. So this is also was a second line which we exposed because we produced 7 reports exposing how basically third countries' financial institutions use as a real mixer for dictatorial regimes, how they help in actually to destroy our democracies, undermine our values and actually, entire system. So, and we have to be loud about it. We should not allow to forget about it and expose this data.
It's time for another quick break to hear these messages from my partners. Next up, Bitcoin 2024, the world's largest Bitcoin conference, is coming to Nashville this year. Come join us for 3 amazing days of keynotes, panels, networking events, and my Women of Bitcoin brunch. The Bitcoin conference is where I launched my podcast almost 3 years ago. You never know what can happen or who you can meet here. Head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL, HODL, for 10% off. Next up, Coinkite, which makes everything you need to safely self-custody your Bitcoin, including the Coldcard Wallet. This is the cold storage device I use for safekeeping my Bitcoin. You can verify the source code, it's ultra secure, and it's easy to use even if you're a beginner. Head to their site in my show notes and get a 5% discount with promo code COINSTORIES. Next up, CrowdHealth. Health insurance costs are sky high, and it's money that feels wasted if you don't need a doctor. By crowdfunding healthcare with other Bitcoiners, I get to avoid traditional insurance fees and support real people instead of mega corporations. CrowdHealth also works to reduce your medical bills, so the community's contributions cover more. Imagine spending just $100 a month on healthcare and investing the rest in Bitcoin. If you're interested, visit joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie. All right, back to the show. I have to be honest with you. I mean, some of this sounds like the plot of a movie, and there are so many big, franchise stories where in the United States we watch these action heroes, and it's always sort of the good guys that are working for the government, right? But I'm learning as I get older and as I've learned about Bitcoin that actually that's not always the case. In fact, many times it's the complete opposite. And there are people in these intelligence agencies and even in law enforcement who will clamp down on anyone who essentially the ruling party says is a threat, and they will remove any freedoms that you have. And that's a scary world to live in. I mean, do you guys ever fear for your lives and for your safety there?
Honestly, of course, of course. The thing is that it's my decision, decision of my family at that time, that we decided to be a part of defending of our freedoms. We know that if not us, who is going to do so? And I have this privilege that I was learn from the best people who used to be opposition and solidarity time in Poland. I have this unique experience. I've been coordinator during Orange Revolution, and I got access to all politicians. So I use as much as possible my connections to defend people who has no other voice, like chance to raise their voice. And I want to be this bridge. So maybe it sounds naive, but I think we need to have people more and more who are ready to defend our freedoms, because democratic countries nowadays in a very big position, but authoritarian regimes are very united, and they are very active, and they undermine all of our values.
Well, it's crazy to think that there's growing tyranny in leading democracies. It's really crazy. Okay, well, one of your other battles right now is to help people become aware of this proof of work ban proposal in Europe. And it seems like Europe is much more aggressive in sort of trying to fight Bitcoin adoption and trying to fight the energy use of Bitcoin. So what do you want people to know?
First of all, I would like to know that we follow closely regulations after adoption of MiCA regulation. It's markets and crypto assets regulation, which basically shapes standards how entire crypto assets should operate in European Union, which is operates as a one single market in 27 member states, and establish also standards for many other countries, for example, like Ukraine, right, which is third country of mass adoption of crypto assets. And why we worry that at that time, while adopting MiCA regulation, there was discussion about ban and it was disappeared, but we follow closely, and we always, while we promoting financial freedoms with of use Bitcoin, were asked, how about use of energy by Bitcoin? How dare you are, as a human rights defenders, use instrument which is dangerous for environment, which is dangerous for energy security? And we started to invite miners, Bitcoin miners, to our meetings, explain and educate regulators that actually it's opposite, that it's actually can help both environmentally and also for energy security. And unfortunately, what we learn from both documents officially, but also during the meetings with politicians, that right now EU regulators are in process of developing the grounds for banning proof of work in a global, impactful way. By the beginning of 2025, we should have already developed a draft and discussed it in European Parliament. And of course, we know that when it's developed, it can be kind of late. We want it to prevent, not to be even labeled in this way in front of regulators, because again, we don't have this privilege to wait, because we end users of Bitcoin. We use it as a payment and fundraising instrument. We defend political prisons. We don't want to give authoritarian regime to use it as a weapon, this accusation and labels against Bitcoin mining, to prosecute people who receive aid from us in Bitcoin. So this is the reason why we try as much as possible to bring support as a non-profit, also a non-partisan human rights organization. We're also registered in US as non-profit, and in EU. We collect as much as possible testimonials. We need to have financial support. We need to have every possible your support, because our small team, we, from one side, very active, but from other side, we cannot do it alone. We need as much as possible solidarity from the Bitcoin community.
Right. So European agencies are essentially formulating a report that's going to inform a vote deciding about proof of work and the energy use. And it sounds very similar to a White House report that was done about Bitcoin mining. And they used the most ridiculous sources instead of interviewing people within the mining community and actually getting real, fact-driven data. They went and interviewed like a central bank blogger from the Netherlands. And like, I mean, just
Yes.
ridiculous, right? So you're hoping to get the right information out so that these legislators and policymakers, they really understand Bitcoin, the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, so that they make an informed decision, right? So let's say one of them is listening right now. Maybe we can translate it. What do you want them to know? Why is it critical that we permit and support proof of work? And why is Bitcoin's energy use a good thing?
So first of all, what we try to do, we try to bring for them, as you said, they listen like experts from the banking industry. And actually, European Central Bank is going to be responsible for deciding who has right to invest on this kind of assets or not. So they want basically to develop a mechanism to discourage investment in such crypto assets as Bitcoin and everything around Bitcoin mining. We want to stop this process. This is super crucial for us to have solidarity. So what we want to do, we want to invite Bitcoin miners, which we unfortunately don't have in Europe. That's why it should be global approach from wherever you are, place you're doing mining, and you want to bring your voice in defense of proof of work globally, because again, it's going to be developed globally, right? And European Union is G7 country union, so they go into to develop this methodology, which is right now in the process of developing for entire G7 countries. And we want to have real voices of Bitcoin miners. We want to have voices of communities who benefit, for example, like African community from gridless, right? They benefit from Bitcoin mining. They have energy. They have capacity to work, actually to boost community. They entire change their lifestyle, and they have more actually convenience and human conditions to operate. And we need these stories. We need these stories to bring to the regulators so they learn. And of course, there are those regulators who are very cynic and those who has agenda. It's always like this. We have these people, but we also have those who will listen to us, those who actually will support us because they care about human rights, they care about developed countries, and they are humans, first of all. So we need to reach them and build coalition, and we need to educate them. And this is our main call. We want to have, as much as possible, right now, over 200 meetings with key politicians in key countries of European Union to stop this process of developing a report which will initially discourage any kind of investments in Bitcoin mining and will label it as a threat to energy security and environment security, which is actually not at all. So we need to defend it. Yeah.
It's the absolute opposite. And Europe, of all places, really needs energy security because a lot has happened over the last couple of years where that's really in question, especially the costs and what it means for human flourishing and prosperity there. Well, what can people do to help?
First of all, as I said, we need to have miners on our side. Whenever you globally, no matter where you are, wherever you do your mining, please reach us out. Natalie, if you allow, I want to share my email via Twitter, via Telegram, or Signal. Please, how comfortable you are, please send us your testimonials. We will work with you and we will help to shape in a written testimonials for regulators in EU, and also we will use it in US, because in US last week I was also asked on every meeting almost about Bitcoin mining and how it's possible that we as human defenders use it if it's dangerous for environment and energy, right, consumption. So this is first thing. Second thing, we need participation online or in person with this kind of meetings. But to do so, we need to have capacity. We need also financial support. As a non-profit organization, we need also your participation to help us to run these campaigns. If you're expert, if you actually payment expert, if you can help us to defend also mixers and other instruments, looking into the legislation and analyzing it, how and where we can have these dangerous provisions, we're happy to cooperate. We're happy to defend and join forces.
And what is the deadline? Because this vote is coming up later this year, right? The clock is ticking.
Yes, exactly. So as far as we know from members of the parliament and also from regulatory documents, by June, it has to be developed, the first draft. So we need to actually shape this attitude, we change negative narrative against Bitcoin before June, preferably. And then, because it's time for vacation, there will be also new European Parliament. The next stage is in the next fight, it's autumn. Okay. So since September till November, I think it's going to be one of the most actually intensive period, but in order to be on a good side with these politicians and do it as soon as possible, we need to start work actually right now, yesterday, I would say.
It's so crazy to think about, because I feel like I see the US and Europe as being so close. And here we are in the US, we're approving spot Bitcoin ETFs, and these accounting rules for companies are changing. And it seems like we're going in the right direction where Bitcoin is being legitimized, although there is still some pushback in terms of maybe some political bodies, including the White House. But it seems like things are going in the way of progress. But on the other continent in Europe, it seems like things are sort of slowed down and people are really, I don't know, resistant to Bitcoin. And do you think it's just because most people there don't understand it? Or do you think it's something deeper where they just like don't want to release control? Like the people, the Christine Lagardes, they really want to make sure that they're maintaining all their power over people's money and they can surveil it in a digital way. What do you think it is?
I think it was. And it's so important to have this change of narrative. And we can do it together only if we work and educate as much as possible media, and it's huge also role what you are doing. We can educate human rights defenders, and we can educate regulators. This is people who makes our life for the moment so hard, right? Mm-hmm. Because if it's banned right now, if it's labeled right now, we lose the last instrument, and it's also going to be weaponized in authoritarian regimes immediately against all of our network of activists. Right. So this is so crucial, not to allow democratic countries to turn onto China-style governance when they want to ban something which is not even present in European Union, because there is almost no Bitcoin miners in European Union for obvious reason, for the price of energy. Right. And this is the reason also why it's so easy to ban it, or actually, to move forward regulation which will discourage investment in Bitcoin mining in a global impactful way, just because there is no voice of Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin advocates. So this is the reason why we ask, and why I also try to encourage everyone in US and whenever you are, just join our campaign, please, and help us to defend Bitcoin, because it's 27 countries. It's established global standards. We don't want it. We don't want the bank of last resort, our human rights, be left without defense and without actually protection. We need to defend it. Almost human rights, if you don't protect them, you lose them. So, and Bitcoin the same. Maybe Bitcoin doesn't need us, but we need Bitcoin. We need it as a payment instrument. We need it right now, not in 50 years. We cannot allow to ban it, label it whenever this fake accusation.
That is well said. And freedom really is fragile. We have to protect it at all costs. I applaud and admire your work, Lyudmyla. I'm going to have all the links that you mentioned and referred to in the show notes, so people can help and support and voice, their reasons for supporting Bitcoin mining. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you at Bitcoin Atlantis. Lyudmyla is going to be a speaker there. We look forward to hearing from her. And
thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you everyone for listening to us. See you soon.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Coin Stories podcast, brought to you by Bitdeer. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any new content. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. My inbox is open if you want to share feedback or guest suggestions. You can reach me at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.